since Robert Kennedy's been very open about his belief, he's correct, that the Central Intelligence Agency was involved in both the murder of his uncle and his father. And he cited a great book by James Douglas, an author who wrote a book called JFK and the Unthinkable. My own book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Everything Jim Douglas says is correct. The only criticism I would have is he looked only at the intelligence agencies. He needed to look at Big Texas Oil and organized crime and others who I think were involved in that crime. But you have a situation in which Kennedy gets the big picture, and I think he is red-pilling people. He did a great interview with Mike Tyson talking about his father's murder. It was absolutely riveting. It was taken down from YouTube within minutes.
When Donald Trump inevitably wins, not inevitably, but hopefully, will he release the JFK files? I know you're very passionate about that. You've written books about it. Do you think he'll do that?
Yes, this is very interesting. He announced the other day, I think many people may not have noticed all of this. He said that RFK would head a presidential commission on assassination attempts. That means they would examine not only the assassination of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, and I hope Dr. Martin Luther King, because the King family brought a civil suit against the FBI, the Memphis police, and others, which they won.
You elaborate on that. A lot of people don't realize that MLK was assassinated. Can you just elaborate on that before you answer that question, just real quick?
Yeah, I mean, the government would have us believe that James Earl Ray, acting alone, killed Dr. Martin Luther King. The King family doesn't believe that. They filed a civil action against the FBI, against the Memphis police, against the federal marshals, and they won in court. So there's a judicial decision that says, yes, those government agencies were complicit in Dr. King's murder. Needs to be examined. The attempt on Ronald Reagan, which has never really been adequately explained. The government's never published their final investigative report, but here's what we know. That John Hinckley was crouching in front of Reagan, shooting upwards. He got off 4 shots. All 4 bullets are accounted for. Reagan was shot from behind and above, which would indicate a second shooter. Now, there's a convoluted, it's almost like the single bullet theory that you're very familiar with in the Kennedy assassination, which they say, well, a bullet could have hit the frame of the windshield of the car and it ricocheted and it bounced back and hit Reagan. No, I don't think so. I'm working on a book on this now, which I'm going to prove that assassination can be tied back to government agencies as well. And then presumably Robert Kennedy would also have to look into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Now, Trump did make a decision to hold back about 20% of the classified documents pertaining to the Kennedy assassination because the then CIA Director Mike Pompeo persuaded him that it would expose the agency's sources and methods. If you think about the time frame, that's impossible because the sources are all dead. And their methods should be examined if they were involved in the murder of a U.S. president. So now Donald Trump has said that RFK would have the full access and authority to all of the documents, and that he would declassify all of them, which I think is welcome news for those who want to get to the bottom of the oldest mystery, I guess, in modern times, and that is who really killed Kennedy and why. Even today, with the mainstream media continuing to try to recycle the Lee Harvey Oswald lone nut acted alone, 63% of the people who told Gallup they don't believe that. They believe there was a conspiracy. The House formed a committee in the 70s, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They concluded that organized crime was also involved in Kennedy's assassination. Well, that's a repudiation of the Warren Commission. So over time, the truth about Kennedy's murder will become known. In the case of Robert Kennedy, according to the coroner, Thomas Noguchi of L.A., very famous, died of 2 point-blank shots to the left rear temple, like here. But Sirhan, the man convicted of his attempted murder, was always in front of Kennedy and shooting wildly. So there was a great review, as I interview with Mike Tyson, as I discussed earlier, with Robert Kennedy about this. But it would be great to have him the head of a commission to get to the bottom of all of these political assassinations or attempted assassinations.
Oh, and I got another question, but I want to go back to this. Is it true, I was just reading this the other day, that MLK was actually very conservative and that he didn't like rock and roll music and that he was a big Christian? Is that true that he was very conservative? Would that have been one of the reasons they might have wanted to take him out?
No, I think that, first of all, the Kings were Republicans. Daddy King, Martin Luther King Sr., was an active Republican. Martin Luther King was a Republican. But during the 1960 election, when Dr. King was arrested in Selma, Richard Nixon, then the vice president, decided it would be improper to get involved in the case, while John Kennedy had his brother, Robert Kennedy, his campaign manager, call the judge and demand that King be released. At that point, Daddy King switched his support from Nixon to Kennedy, which is probably a deciding factor in Kennedy's election. What really, I think, brought all hell down on Dr. King was he came out against the Vietnam War. So you have two events happening in close sequence. We know that the FBI is wiretapping Dr. King. They're listening to his phone calls. Wiretaps, by the way, approved by Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Very interesting. And two things are heard. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, knows that Martin Luther King is planning to endorse Robert Kennedy in a challenge to President Lyndon Johnson. And then weeks later, Robert Kennedy, campaigning in the California Democrat presidential primary, talking to a student audience, is asked, "Will you reopen the investigation into your brother's murder?" And when he says yes, within weeks, both King and Kennedy are dead. My grind so refined, I got no time for no games. Ask yourself